Guys, we have a major problem on our hands. I don't know if you heard, well, you probably have at this point, but the state of Texas has deployed the National Guard to the southern border to do the job of the federal government since the federal government won't secure the border itself. The order to deploy the National Guard was given by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who finally used his constitutional authority to declare an invasion, allowing him additional emergency powers that he is able to use in order to take on the issue of border security himself. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but last week, El Paso, Texas, which is right across the Rio Grande from Juarez, a very violent city in Mexico, declared a state of emergency less than 2 weeks ago, following the largest migrant caravan in the history of the United States that crossed into the U.S. There were over 1,000 people who were in this group, the largest group who's ever crossed over at a single time in U.S. history. The border crisis is getting absolutely out of control. So kudos to Governor Abbott for taking the bold step of actually deploying the National Guard. They're using razor wire, military vehicles, a pretty strong show of force to secure the southern border and prevent the next migrant caravan from storming the U.S. border. I don't know if they're going to go so far as to actually deport anybody back to Mexico. It seems like a step he's been unwilling to take at this point. But this is all coming at a time that Title 42 is set to expire. It was set to expire December 21st. But earlier in the week, a number of Republican states had issued an 11th hour challenge to the Supreme Court, wanting them to stay the expiration of Title 42. So just to give you a little bit of background for those who may not understand, Title 42 is a section of U.S. code that gives the president the ability to prohibit entry of people into the U.S. when there is a serious danger of the introduction of a communicable disease. So this policy was enforced following an order from the CDC that was issued in March of 2020 as the nation went into lockdown in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a Trump era policy effectively. Now, once Title 42 expires, that is going to open the floodgates to people being able to come into the United States with quote unquote asylum claims. And I say quote unquote because the vast majority of people filing for asylum aren't valid asylum claims. They're economic migrants who are simply looking for a better life. Hey, not going to knock you. Nothing wrong with that. But we have rules, we have laws as a nation, and economic migrants do not qualify for asylum. So the Department of Homeland Security has already said they are bracing for a migrant surge of up to 14,000 people per day after Title 42 expires. There is going to be absolute anarchy at the U.S. southern border unless somebody does something. Texas officials have said they're expecting illegal border crossings to increase by as much as 40%. All right, now, just to give you guys a little bit of a bird's eye view on this issue. Since President Biden took office, there have been more than 5.5 million illegal aliens that have entered into the United States. This year alone set a record. There's been more than 2.7 million illegal aliens who were apprehended on U.S. borders or at U.S. borders in fiscal year 2022 alone. 2.2 million of them were apprehended on the southwest border. And for all the people who say, what's your source? Those numbers are coming directly from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, right? Now, of those people who were apprehended at the southern border, nearly 100 of them were known or suspected terrorists. So these aren't just your good-natured mom and pop and their kid coming up from Guatemala and Nicaragua who are, wanting to engage in a better life and get a job here in the United States because their country is wrecked or not being managed in a way that they would see fit. There are people who have actively sought to do this country harm and are on terrorist watch lists who are attempting to enter the southern border. And that's just the ones we've caught. Who knows how many we haven't caught, right? Now, real quick, before I get too far and take a look at this report.
Yeah, so we're down here filming a documentary, so I've done tons of interviews. One of the interviews this morning was with a nurse. The nurse was told they could get a job here. The nurse had contact with her family, lost contact with the family, is completely destitute. We interviewed a lawyer, a tradesman, people who had jobs in their country, Sarah, who had homes in their country, countries that are not qualifying for asylum. They're being coerced by the Biden administration to come here, and they're now homeless. I was with 5 shelters today, homeless shelters for American homeless. They can't take American homeless in. The migrants now are homeless in the United States. They will resort to trafficking, exploitation, debt bondage, slave labor, it's anarchy. It is a full-blown invasion. Is it compassionate to this child? Is it compassionate to this child laying here on hard concrete in 40-degree weather? Is that compassion? Having that child, I interviewed this family, traveling 2,000 miles. Again, is that compassion? Is this the Red Cross is now stepping in. The UN is stepping in. Joe Biden single-handedly has now created a homeless class in this country. Children are being trafficked, they're being sold. We went into brothels last night in Juarez. The Mexican National Guard, and there was a lawyer who told me this from Cuba. The Mexican National Guard, they're the ones kidnapping migrants in Mexico. They get on a bus, they reroute the bus to a warehouse with children at gunpoint, and they force them to pay 500 pesos to 5,000 pesos per person before they get released to the cartel. They're being kidnapped in Mexico. The children I interviewed this morning were kidnapped. The mom says she doesn't know what happened to her children when she was not supervising the children. When the kids came back, they're drugged. The kids come in here, they can barely move. They're telling us they put a powder in their food in Mexico before they bring them across.
I don't know how anybody can look at that video or look at the situation at the border and not appreciate how fast this situation is completely deteriorating. This is not how our immigration system is supposed to be set up. This is not humanitarian. These are not ideal conditions by any stretch of the imagination, for sure. Now, I know there are people out there who just basically want open borders, or they want us to be able to just take in all of these migrants, these millions of people, and they're unaware or unconcerned about the fact that this is completely unsustainable. Ignoring for a moment the financial cost to the United States, even if we just take a look at the human toll that this is taking, or the journey that these people have to make from where they're coming from. These are people who have to pay thousands of dollars to the cartel to get them across the borders, because the cartels control the southern side of the U.S. border, in some cases probably the northern side as well, which is why there's so much fentanyl coming across the border, as well as other drugs and human trafficking that's taking place. But some of these girls that are coming up are being raped multiple times and then sent back across the border to come back through to pretend to be a family unit. That's how they're trafficking some of these people. So when we see people outraged over the family separation policies that we heard about nonstop during the Trump administration, you got to understand that with a lot of these people, they're not family units. It's two individuals or one individual who snatched up a child. They're pretending the child is theirs in order to get across the border. Again, some of these kids are raped multiple times and discarded. Some are sent back across the border to be used to facilitate the travel of other individuals. Some are caught up into the industry of human sex trafficking. And I know people who work in this area, and I can tell you stories that would pin your ears back. Just to give you an example, and it's as bad as you think. I mean, some of these girls are chained to a bed for they're chained to a bed pretty much permanently, and they're raped 10 to 20 times per day. That is what this system has gotten us. Now, the reason that we had this system is because, let's face it, neither political party is serious about wanting to actually stop what's happening at the southern border. They're not serious about a sound immigration policy. And unfortunately, until they are, this is the system that we're going to be dealt with. So once again, hey, kudos to Greg Abbott for doing something. Was not a fan of sending buses of migrants deeper into the United States, which, again, I've been a fairly harsh critic on him about. But I don't know what's going to happen. The Supreme Court right now is going to make a ruling on Title 42, so we got to wait and see. But in the meantime, I guess we got to simply hope for the best and prepare for the worst.